Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Score, using CSA reports to improve fleet performance. Your hosts for this session are Tim Henry. He's a VP at Fleetworthy. Some of you may know him better as the co-founder and former CEO of Hall. He's a transportation tech entrepreneur who has made a career out of simplifying regulatory complexity for fleets. He's going to do something really difficult today. He's going to talk about math in a very compelling way. The reason it's compelling is because that math has huge implications for safety and compliance for fleets. Along with him is John Van Nortwick, who is going to share some real world examples of how to use that math to, in fact, make your real world fleets more safe and compliant and operationally efficient. He spent 20 years doing that, and he's currently a solutions engineer here at Fleetworthy. So I'm going to hand it over to Tim. Take it away.
Thanks, Blake. And thanks, John, for joining me.
Of
It's always
course.
good to have a partner in crime here. And, today, I'm really excited because we get to do a couple of things. We get to showcase a free product that we're bringing to the market. I think you and I have been, talking about this for a while,
Yep.
how we can really commercialize insights around CSA, and just, flood the market with knowledge because I think there's a lot of unknowns, a lot of confusion around CSA, SMS, basic scores, and heck, I mean, I had to learn myself while building this product. And so we're gonna share a little bit about kind of what we built, what we're bringing to market, explain a little bit about CSA, maybe highlight potential changes coming this year. Again, there's some unknowns, but I think it's important for us to, highlight what could be changing. Again, more homework for everyone on the call. Our apologies. But also, you're going to dive into like real world examples. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. There's so much great data out there. It's just in the way we wrap it up is makes it a lot easier to deal with. But yeah, I'm excited. I always get excited when you and I sit and talk about CSA, which is probably a bad sign. But
Yeah. Well, Fleetworthy gave us the opportunity to, just chat about today. So yeah, let's get started. And, maybe for those who are watching today, we're gonna have a Q&A session after this, that, you'll be able to ask us questions. And again, we're always honest. If we can't answer them, we're gonna find the person here at Fleetworthy who can. But as always, you can always reach out to us after this webinar to learn more about how Fleetworthy can really support your operations from a day in, day out, tactically, what solutions we build, or just with understanding of regulations that we kind of live and breathe here. So yeah, let's dig into it, and I'm sure we're gonna have some really good conversations today. I think it's always important as we try to like, I'm always about like, what's the whole goal of this? Why am I learning something new? I'm always important. I think it's important to kind of understand like the whys behind it. And the reality is that, CSA scores really do have massive implications for fleets as they relate to, their day-to-day operation continuity, right? I think, the reality is that if a fleet has CSA scores below a certain threshold, they actually can be put out of service. That means trucks are not moving, you can't bill your customers, can't generate revenue, right? Again, we're all in business, and that's like a numero uno thing that we can't have happen. I think there's also this kind of understanding that FMCSA is looking at us all the time, and like how am I being portrayed in the market? I think it's important, right? And I think the two things that, not only revenue, but I also do think, as I was building Hall, insurance is crucial, even running any business. And we know insurance and transportation is like one of the biggest topics that anyone ever talks about. But the reality is that CSA does have massive implications to how fleets are actually acquiring or maintaining their insurance policy. So we're going to dig into that, the whys. We can have a whole webinar just on how insurance leverages CSA data to support their underwriting policies. But, I think the reality, if there's one takeaway, and we kind of highlight it here, is that, it's not just a regulatory metric of like, hey, how the FMCSA is looking at us. There's a lot of other third-party partners that you may be using that may be grading you off your CSA score. So I think it's really important to understand how they are calculated, what they look like today, and what I can do to really solve them. John, anything you'd add here? I think we'll touch on how they can solve some issues later in the
yeah, I
presentation.
mean, any third party that's looking to do business with you is going to look at this publicly available data to help make a decision. And that if you're going to ship something, you want to make sure that there's not going to be any ramifications and obviously insurance. And yeah, we're seeing that with all of our fleets it impacts all aspects of their business. So.
Yeah, cool. Let's keep going. The I think that maybe zooming out, like why we built this free CSA report and why we're giving it out to the market. I think, as Blake mentioned, as the former CEO and co-founder of Hall, Hall really focused on bringing self-serve products to the long tail of transportation, whether it's compliance management, maintenance, or safety. The one biggest problem we saw out there is really around helping fleets understand and identify problems happening within their own fleet. And we kept seeing fleets not really understand. It's like, why do I need to make sure my driver fitness score is in good standing? Or hey, I'm just not going to buy Haul because I'm good what I'm doing now. So it was like a very crucial ROI for us. Like, why is Haul selling this thing to me? But most importantly, when we asked them hey, go tell me your leading issue in your fleet today. They kind of ran into more of the business operations, like, man, that broker's not giving me the right price for this load. But, when we kind of went a level deeper, they couldn't really say, this is a biggest operational problem I have today. And this is, if I don't fix it, I may be put out of business. Like they had no sense of that. So in order for us to really highlight why compliance was important or why maintenance management was important, it was really important for us to highlight, highlight their CSA scores, kind of what their current basics were to be able to kind of help them say, hey, this is important. This is why it's important. And this is why you need to take action. So again, our goal is to, and at the end of this webinar, you have a very clear, call to action to, be able to schedule a time to run your own report. But the biggest thing that we're really trying to bring to market is easy and accessible insights around your fleet, around CSA. I think that's the biggest goal. And, the great thing about technology is that you're able to take, these insights and really share them with the masses. John, as we kind of, before we dig into CSA, I know that you've been one of the biggest proponents of really bringing CSA to the industry as a large. Is there anything that speaks to you of why this is important?
I just think there's so much great data. I love that it's an umbrella that kind of drills down into all aspects of the business and a lot of the products and services that we try to help with fleets. So it's just such a if you look at the data, it's so meaningful as far as where there's opportunities within your fleet to improve things, whether it's in maintenance or HOS or training drivers on HOS, because I see that I got a split sleeper berth problem, and the split sleeper berth rule now is much more complicated than it was 10 years ago when I first started playing with driver logs. But yeah, there's so much data there that it's just I love to look at it and analyze it and see where we can find geographical driver-based, vehicle-based data. The trends are there, and it's fun to look
And
at.
I think the biggest thing is that, I think you and I both agreed on is that this shouldn't be behind a paywall. If we're truly as a vendor, as a major stakeholder in this industry, this is one thing that we can bring to the industry to help keep our roadways safer, right? I think a lot of vendors say this. I think we had an opportunity to actually bring this to market. So again, it's just again, there's some things that you just do that because they're right.
Right.
Um, I think in practice, what our CSA report does today, it really allows fleets to understand, leveraging their data, really understand where they're ranked today against their peers, and some of that's nuance, and we'll get into what I mean by that. But truly identifying core areas that they should be focusing on today, whether it's unsafe driving or it's vehicle maintenance, very clear, identify it, leveraging their own data. And again, I want to stress this again. A lot of the times what we saw with the why fleets weren't leveraging it, because historically this is a very manual process. You got to go to your FMCSA port, download your raw data, throw into Excel, pivot it, understand some trends. But then, okay, you see trend lines, but then how do you map that to actual action, right? So that's why, we're excited about pairing this with, John, his team is really being able to really consultatively help a fleet understand, hey, I'm seeing these things. I'm seeing a lot of red. Like, what can I do about it, right? And I think the biggest thing is identify. Um, our goal is to help fleets understand, but also point them to either just operational changes they can make, or actually bona fide, verified solutions that they can start implementing in their operations to help them really solve these problems. So again, this is both technology and people combined to really help the industry understand what they're struggling with. Um, I'm gonna keep moving on CSA basics. I think the biggest thing I want to do here, as Blake mentioned before, this stuff can be pretty. I don't want to say boring, but I want to say that it can be pretty nuanced, right? Like, I don't know if everyone on the call wants me to get into behavioral analysis, safety improvement categories, right? That's a mouthful, that's a lot of syllables, but our goal is to kind of identify how some of this works in interplays, but also kind of walk away with a framework that you can start interpreting your own data and taking action. I think my biggest goal with this webinar, with the help of John, was helping take the product, take his framework that he's developed over 20 years, helping fleets understand to make sense of it and really, open source it, give it to give it to the masses because at the end of the day, we can't work with every fleet. That's just not the reality, but we can actually do a good service by helping them understand the fundamentals and helping them walk away with the framework that they can help themselves. So that's where we're going to kind of dive in here and really help everyone walk away with it. So let's keep moving. Okay, a lot of stuff on this slide. So let's kind of touch on some fundamentals. I'm not going to touch on everything, but I think I want you to kind of understand kind of some fundamentals. The CSA is a program within SMS, which is Safety Management System. And why does that matter? Because there's kind of all these acronyms being thrown at you, but it's really understand how this is actually playing on one another. Think of the SMS as the engine. It's capturing roadside inspection crash data to help you, and they categorize information into currently seven basics. SMS is used to score and rank carriers, and they work together as a hierarchy. They're not separate standalone things, but they work together. So it's really important to kind of understand how this plays within one, or we'll get into how it's calculated in a later slide. But if there's one thing to kind of understand is that the SMS is part of the CSA program. It leverages roadside and crash data that may be that's related to you and it's categorized based on different seven different basics. We'll touch on how that may change, but that's like the simplistic way just to understand it because at the end of the day, this is just not a single score. There's seven distinct safety categories that are telling a lot of different stories. And John, in his case studies later in this webinar, is going to touch on that. He's going to touch on, hey, how a fleet who may be doing great in unsafe driving. That means they have a strong safety program, maybe struggling on driver fitness. Both related to the driver, but two different distinct categories that one they should be really proud of, one that they still have some work to be done. John, anything I'm missing, anything that you would love to highlight here?
No, I think it's great the way we are going to break this down. We can all, some of us have read the methodology and it's not worth your time to go through that. But there is some key components to understand about how it works to help you analyze the data. And we're going to help analyze that data for you within the report, but then further breaking that down. So, yeah.
John, you called it. We're going to break it down from. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the seven basics.
Yeah. So I kind of see these as little different windows into the different compliance and operational aspects of your fleet. So by looking at your trends within each of these, the unsafe, those are kind of your basic way you look at safety in general. Those are your speeding violations. This is kind of your behavior items. The crash indicator, of course, is your accidents, but the HOS compliance, that's going to look at the HOS data. So that can be a window into your HOS data, your ELD, and even some of your operational items that you're asking drivers to do stuff that's not easy to handle within the hours of service regulations. So that can untrigger a lot of good things. Vehicle maintenance, it's going to help with DVIR and are we doing those well, along with your other regular maintenance, controlled substance, and hazardous material. Obviously, there are components of that. And then the driver fitness. Are we hiring the right drivers? Are we doing it within the regulations? So it's really, seven windows into the overall fleet risk, which ties into the operational efficiency.
Some of them are really tactical, right? Like, does my driver have a valid license? But some of them are nuanced, right? Like, would you agree with that? Like, some of them are like a moving target. you may be in good standing today, but let's say you had a fleet operator in this southeast region who left, who really had a great driver program. You may start seeing trends change because they're just not on top of it how they used to be. Would you? I think that's how I always interpret this stuff.
Yeah, I think that, and even within the different basics, there's some of the different nuances. But and we'll probably hit on that several times. But you keep making trends, and I think that's one of the keys for what I think we wanted people to take out is noticing those trends early, because you don't want to wait till you start seeing that you're getting more inspections, or you're all of a sudden under the radar, or the your insurance rate goes up. If you start seeing those changes early, it's easier to make the change, and you're going to hit it before it actually starts impacting your business. So I think the trending is key.
Yeah. So we're gonna kind of talk a little bit here from a high level how this is all calculated, because I think, yeah, I dare say in any game you want to know the rules. You want to understand the rules of how do I need to operate within this game. And the reason I share that is that I think as you start understanding how you can start taking action and really start changing this, your basic scores, and we'll touch on potentially ISS value if we have time, because how you're being prioritized for roadside inspection. It's important to kind of understand kind of how this is hidden. I think that the major inputs I want to highlight that is violations. There are three: violation severity. This is typically violations have weights to them. So again, some violations are more serious than others. Some of our, think of them as a slap on the hand, right? I think as domain experts on this call, I don't need to explain to you kind of if you had to guess what violations are worse, you can probably guess which ones they are. Time waiting, right? I think time waiting is also important because there's more of a weight on the most recent versus the ones in the past, right? Because we want to, the FMCSA wants to get a current pulse on a driver, pardon me, on a fleet today. And then exposure, right? This is a really interesting one because tries to normalize the data and really try to have fleets who are moving the same miles together. And again, the one thing just to acknowledge, this is all collected through roadside inspection and crash reports over the last 2 years. Every violation a carrier receives gets assigned a severity weight. Again, I just want to be very detailed here. More dangerous violations count more heavily. And then they're categorized in the different 7 basics. And the total, weighted violation in each basic divided by their exposure. Again, Blake mentioned earlier, this is all math. Google methodology, you can actually see the equation. This is actually an open source formula that anyone on this call can just to understand. We try to make it more simply with our report. And the one thing I think it's just important to kind of understand is the context and the safety groups. Again, this really tries to help to really, and we'll talk about changes, really try to compare apples to apples. Again, like any system, some people agree with it, some people don't. And you'll see on maybe proposed 2026 changes, the FMCSA has done a pretty good job trying to compare fleets to fleets that actually operate in a very similar environment as theirs. We'll touch on how it may be changing, but it's important because I think it's not fair to compare a fleet of 25 trucks to a fleet with 5,000. Right? They're just not the same operational structure. They may, they may not move in the same stuff. So again, I think just to understand context and then output, right? At the end of the day, you don't want, you want to have an output, a percentile risk that, you don't get pulled over. And we'll talk about how this interacts with the ISS value later. But again, and then one thing to keep in mind, this is a monthly look in a rear, right? So every month, at the end of every month, there is a published schedule. So you can just Google it. You'll actually see based on last month's, what's my current my basics today. So again, that's my poor attempt to just kind of talk about the math, but there's just some good contextual understanding here because a lot of people get tripped up of, hey, like, why am I like, what about me versus them? Maybe John, anything to add here?
No, I think you hit on all the key areas there. Some of the things are things we'll talk about in more detail. The severity that's going to help you with where you want to focus your time on. Those are going to have the biggest impact. The time waiting, of course, there's a long tail on some of these. So again, that's why it's good to stay on top of it and make sure you don't run into a big issue, because those most recent ones are going to be there for a while. They're going to start dropping off in point value, but they're still going to be with you for 24 months. So, and then the exposure, and so you are getting compared to people of your own kind, but I think that's a good summary, and will see how that plays into how we look at some of the data.
Cool. And I'm going to do a time check for myself. We're going to keep up the pace a little bit, but what can
Yep.
change? I think there's two areas that things may change. There's conversation around changing, dividing some basic groups, which makes a lot of sense. Which just a couple of things that we were seeing split. Vehicle maintenance we split into two, and then controlled substances. The other thing, new math. Dare I say it, new math in all of this. Rather than having a 1 to 10 severity rating, really kind of simplify it to a 1 to 2. Again, this is a very binary approach to it. Again, and I think everyone can agree on this. How do you really have a very simple methodology that's supposed to encompass such a large, diverse industry? It's hard, again. So I give a lot of credit to the FMCSA to really try to update this. This was not done in siloed. I think if you just I think the ATA just did a public comment on their feedback on this, so it's ongoing, and the FMCSA is trying to pull in every stakeholder to review these proposed changes, and I think the maybe John could touch on the potential last three on as it relates to what may be coming later this year.
Yeah, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on it as we get into the details and the changes that may take place. So we're still looking into those, but the intervention thresholds are going to change a little bit. A lot of these all make sense, and I think everyone's going to like it regardless of where they end up. But the proportional percentile, so you shouldn't have a drastic change in your score just because of one additional safety event that moves you into a new category. So softening some of that and segmenting more like vehicles, and also vehicles that have a little more risk naturally associated with them, like a tanker, depending on what you're hauling, what type of truck you are, those segmentations will be divided to provide a little more.
That one caught my eye when I saw the proposed changes, mainly because like we hear that on the ground when we talk to our customers or just fleet partners that we've interacted over the years. I can't tell you how many times we're like, I'm an LTL carrier. I'm a much different fleet than a full truckload dry van carrier moving long haul routes, or I'm a tanker carrier. I take this stuff super seriously. So it's, even when you interact with different fleets of hauling different kinds, they're I would say they're sometimes the most CSA focused at the end of the day, mainly because they have to be, right? Like if an
Yeah,
accident doesn't occur, it's a big boom, right? And that's where this all matters. It's I don't know. I don't know if you would agree with that, but at the end of the day, I think everyone is pretty stoked on trying to rethink, because that means we're kind of having an open, honest conversation. Everyone just wants to be graded fair.
right. Yeah.
Cool. All right. We talked about the hypothetical,
Yep.
but the reason why we have John here is to actually talk about real world applications of all this. And I think the one thing I'm most most excited about is trying to, our goal is to kind of show you how you're being graded, right? That's the honest truth around from the FMCSA, from third parties you interact with, whether it's insurance, a freight broker that you may receive loads from, or from a 3PL or from a shipper. But I think it's also important to kind of take that data and then really have a nuanced view of it, because I think as John's going to really touch on, this is just not a grade. It does provide you a really strategic framework to use internally as a fleet operator, kind of say, what should I be focusing on this quarter? What should I be banging on the desk to prioritize from a technology investment this year? Because we have to make changes here. Maybe John, you can touch on the slide a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on the regulations that have been around for a long time, and it provides that coverage across those violations to help you focus in on where you need to focus in on. So much more than a report card, it really can help you drive your compliance and safety program and where you need to focus. And it's like you say, it's dynamic. So you're going to be looking at those trends again. So and people that are looking at you are looking at those trends. Am I increasing? That's somebody I want to look at from an CSA perspective. It's a shipper. That's somebody I'm a little wary of. But if you're decreasing, just the opposite. So I'm going to realize that they're doing some good things.
And then you coined like a three-step framework.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just talk about how you look at CSA, its data, because that you took this framework and then you applied it. We'll talk about a few actual clients that John you've worked with over the years. But yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about the framing and kind of how this is the most important part because I'm trying to take how you look at this and really educate everyone on this call and future viewers like, hey, this is a best in class framework to really leverage this data.
Yeah, and I might go to the extreme monitoring closely. I mean, I think it's ideal if I'm looking at those violations as they're coming in from the driver. So I'm looking at the violations that I'm getting on a daily basis. Is this something I need a data queue? Is this something I can data queue? Is this something, and then root causing each of those violations as they come in. So not only am I looking at the violations monitoring continuously, and the trends that I'm monitoring continuously by looking at those violations that are coming in daily, and then that root cause analysis. So um, is it a DVI? The vehicle maintenance issue comes in. Is that a DVIR issue that everybody
Mhm.
needs some driver training? He needs to understand how to look at those brakes, or is it an actual bigger issue with the maintenance? Which is one of the changes they're looking at making is going to help with that root
Yeah.
cause. And if it's an HOS violation, I'm going to look at those logs. Is it a split sleeper berth problem that I need to do some training with the drivers? Am I sitting my drivers too long? There's detention at the customer sites. Maybe I need to work on that operationally, but we can root cause those to identify, and a lot of times multiple ways to solve that problem and address that, and then correct the problem at a systematic level. So whether that's ongoing training or changes in how we do the maintenance, making sure I'm looking for that 15 minutes of on duty not driving time prior to their first driving segment to make sure they're doing their DVR. There's just a bunch of things we can do with that data to improve our processes.
Yeah, the one thing, as we were kind of prepping for this, as we were kind of going through, correct systematically, I think the one thing, as an operator, you think you have to bring in hammer to solve every problem, and sometimes it's more nuanced. It could be just a driver or manager that just didn't know something. They're like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. So just like an SOP fix, right? That's super simple.
Yep.
That's training. Doesn't cost you much to like solve a big growing problem. But sometimes, it could be like a bigger problem. It's a vendor we've been using that's been dropping the ball for us. They're supposed to, we're paying them for the service. And now we have to reevaluate, is that who we want to move forward? So I think there's very simple things people can do. I don't think it has to be this crazy capital investment to actually make changes here. I don't know if you've seen that through your time, but that was one.
All sorts of different changes, right? And it can be about just bringing attention to it and emphasizing safety in general and cultural.
Yeah,
We had one of the fleets that I'm going to talk about. It's not in the slide, but one of the things they did was just to help drivers focus and know where to make sure they're doing the checks properly. They put a golden ticket in the trailer at
yeah,
places that should be checked,
love it.
and they would, if they happen to get on that trailer and they get look in that place correctly, they would get that golden ticket, and it would be
Yeah,
a
Willy
good
Wonka.
car. Yeah, so it was just creative ways to get people thinking about safety. Because a lot
Yeah.
of times I think it's you're in a hurry, you're trying to do different things, and you forget about that. That's why some of our the proactive alerts that we provide, or it's the right message at the right time. So getting them focused on that, I think, can really make a difference. And then, of course, like you say, some bigger systematic things that can be changed, but
Mhm.
really drilling into that root cause can lead you to a lot of good solutions. And there's multiple solutions per problem in many cases.
It is the one thing I want to take away from that is it's a culture thing. I think that's like a cool thing that can solve a lot of this because if it's coming from the top, like, hey, like above all else, safety is first. If you're making it cultural, if it comes from top down, that's infectious, right? That's, you can, advocate for yourself a bit more. The driver managers can advocate for different processes or technologies to improve their day to day. So anyway, I really always kind of love when we're kind of thinking about simple ways and very technical ways to solve a problem. But maybe we'll dive in into actual problems you help solve, you and your team, John. As it relates to unsafe driving, that's obviously one of the basics. You kind of saw a signal from a customer, and and then you're able to find out there's like a geographic commonality here.
Yeah, this was a large for-hire carrier up in the Northwest. They have some dedicated to different areas that they foster, but we noticed a an increase, the trends I'm talking about, an increase in their unsafe driving basics. So before it becomes an issue, we wanted to drive in to see what's causing that, and it was focused on a specific violation type was the first thing, and it was failure to obey.
Mm.
Well, let's look at those failure to obey and look at those across different parameters. Looking at the across different parameters wasn't necessarily driver specific related to the vehicle, but it was a specific to Washington State. So 90% of them were taking place in Washington State. So very simple. It's a failure to obey. They found very specific locations where it was taking place. So we applied some different things to warn drivers about those specific areas in a timely manner. So when they're approaching those elements, they remembered that they were approaching a signal that they should pay attention to, because it wasn't like they were purposely trying to not obey the traffic information, but it was just the right information, getting into the right lane, making sure they're able to make the maneuver that they need to make. So that immediately eliminated that problem, which high point value and a very important basic. Catching it early, that immediately dropped it down, and then they saw that trend stopped continuing. We actually had them on a webinar, and of course, they've got one violation 2 weeks before the webinar, but 92% reduction was still pretty darn good. So
yeah, that's pretty good.
That was good stuff.
So for me, if I was going to take away this, if I'm a fleet on this call or someone who watches later on, it's like a lot of digging into your CSA. You can identify common trends that really allow you to just focus your resources on one leading problem. So that, and again, in this case, it was geographic. There was just training opportunity and also leveraging in-cab alerts to really kind of give a heads up as well. So it seemed super actionable, a little bit of investment, but it was mostly a training plus technology play.
Yeah. Right. So some training, mentioning at the driver meetings every week, and then an active proactive alert. And then, as a part of that process, there was several layers of where those unsafe. So kind of got control of this problem. What's our next problem? And so it just started a process that they continue to improve on.
Cool. Right on, John. Thanks for that overview. All right. We talked about vehicle maintenance a little bit before. And with this client, you saw a vehicle maintenance spike, violations at weigh stations. I think I'm not going to test anyone, but if we remember, your data, a lot of data is pulled from roadside inspections, weigh station inspections, and crash. Maybe John, you can help us kind of understand what was happening. What did you identify, and kind of how did you provide a solution for this fleet?
Yeah, so it's a flatbed carrier in the South. Very safety focused, really good safety director there. Former Marine as well, so that's always a bonus. He noticed he was getting an increase in his maintenance. That's where it starts, monitoring those trends. Looking at the violation types again. This time it was tires. And that's another way to group things, which I always do right off the bat, is look at groups, because I don't know the nuances between the different tire violations, but I know I have a tire problem. That's a good way to make things a little bit easier to group and see those signals that are popping up for you. And then looking at those specific violations for his tires, they were really focused in a specific state, and he actually was able to drill down to a specific weigh station. So different weigh stations have different technology. So this is all good information. The weigh station got technology that allowed it to check tire pressure as the trucks were rolling through. Obviously, if they see a problem, they pull over, and so they're picking up trailers, different things that can happen, flatbed. There's a lot going on there. So obviously we did general training, but the big thing that made a difference was getting the drivers to pull over 2 exits ahead, using a proactive alert as drivers approach that, so that if a driver was new to that area, they would still get that alert. Pull over, do a second DVIR focused on the tires, and again, just solve that issue completely. And a lot of different ways to be able to solve that, but I think the key is you're following those trends and drilling down into the details and across all the different parameters that you have, whether it's geographical, the violation type, driver. vehicle, that could trace you back to the maintenance or different areas to look at. But yeah, that was how they identified and solved that little blip.
That's cool. That resonates with me, just having custom flatbed customers in the past. I think at the end of the day, like they're a tip, the reason why that they're goods on a flatbed because it's bulky, it's heavy, it doesn't fit in the standard dry van, and you know, you, and I'm sure everyone on this call knows this, but there's a lot of strapping. There's a lot of detailed work that you need to do. So if you're seeing kind of for me, vehicle maintenance, well, like if I don't get a hold of that, are we going to really diminish on our strapping policy, right? So we cannot afford to not strap down an object correctly. So for
Right.
me, I see that as like a leading indicator of like if we're not really focusing here, we're going to probably see some actually pretty large safety events that could occur in the future.
I think that's a
Um,
huge point, right? The earlier I can pinpoint some of these issues, none of us want to have that tire issue and have it eventually blow, or if you get a strapping issue and something rolls off, that's dangerous. So the quicker we can identify those issues, it reduces that exposure that you have over time. So you don't wait till it becomes an issue where we actually get in an incident or an
uh,
accident. Let's try to identify it from the violations that we're getting from the CSA. I suppose a good thing from getting a violation is that it is getting the before an incident happens. So
totally. I mean, good on the that inspection site to have that technology. I know, every DOT in different states, have different, a lot of the same steps, but like, I mean, I would say I'm probably grateful for that. At the end of the day, that's giving
right,
me
you
really
can't
good
be out
coverage.
with every truck all the time. So they are, and so they can help you catch those trends earlier. And yeah, if we treat them that way, that proves
Yeah.
the safety overall.
Thanks, John. Cool. Last but not least,
Ah,
speeding trend.
speed.
This one kind of I like this one because it really does touch on kind of the insurance pressure and as it relates to basic scores. Yeah, how we're at the end of the day, um, John, again this probably face not only a safety, these kind of regulatory potential issues, but also like, potentially run their business without having insurance policy or increase in insurance can actually change the overall revenue structure of a business, right? Especially, if it's a for hire versus a private. But yeah, maybe we can dig into this. I'll be curious how to learn how you kind of, really help this fleet, keep the lights on.
Yeah, so it's been an ongoing issue. Large carrier down in the south runs nationwide, a lot of teams. Speed's always kind of been and I think a lot with a lot of fleets, it's a challenge. The drivers are trying to deliver on time and they make money and by
Yeah.
at the mile, but at the same time, we want a safe speed, frequency, and severity both get impacted by that speed. So it's a huge element that we want to look at. I think everybody's got multiple things that they apply to that problem. By
Mhm.
looking at your CSA data, you can start seeing where you're seeing significant issues and you're seeing the violations that are taking place. So by looking at those violations and seeing where those speeding violations were taking place, they were able to be a little more targeted about how they're applying that, and they're typically in areas where there's higher risk. So using the CSA data to help combat that and using again alerts in the cab, training, coaching on drivers that aren't slowing down once they get the alerts in different areas and making it very targeted and specific, I think was the key to seeing some good results there rather than just overall speeding or trying to correct everything as a why they're driving everywhere across every element. There's being able to drill down into some specific areas, specific drivers and things that they know are issues made it a much more solvable problem from a global everybody's got a speed problem to let's nail down and drill into some
Where are
specific.
we having a speed problem? Who is having the speeding problem? At the end of the day, like being able
And
to
yep, with
simplify.
coaching, proactive coaching after the event, coaching based on drivers that weren't adhering to the changes that were recommended. So yeah, it's a full spectrum and it again works and worked well.
The cool thing here, and again, selfishly as a plug, I know with our Safety Plus product, we get to, benefit from safety alerts across other fleets on platform, right? I think as we think about how do we keep the industry as a whole safe. I love that feature. It was one of the coolest features when I got to dig into the Safety Plus product. So, but anyway, I won't. Yeah, I'll let any interested fleets reach out to learn more. But I think as it relates to safety, there's very few products that actually have this platform effect around safety alerts that fleets can really benefit from. So anyway, that's my selfish plug because I really love that feature.
I did too. I was trying not to mention it too many times, but good one. So I was,
Um,
camera providers in part of my history, and that was very, real time. Here's what happened. Your drivers get in trouble. Being
mhm,
proactive, the drivers like that. I'm the coach in the cab, tapping them
mhm.
on the shoulder. You're coming up to this location. Watch out for that pole on the left because we've hit it 3 times. So,
Totally. I mean,
like the
there's very,
proactive driver friendly nature is key.
John, I think we need to get a whole a webinar on that because I do think and it's not the fault of some awesome vendors out there. Is that just the way that product's built? It takes advantage of, we have a lot of trucks on our platforms, so it takes advantage of the collective learnings of fleets and safety events. Um, as a time check, we are we're a little over right now. Our apologies, and that's just a symptom of us one being excited about this. Two, there's a lot to really dig in, and three, you know, I think the most important thing, if I had to highlight, kind of three things that every fleet on this call, or any fleet lead who should be focused on passing on this information to leadership or another peer is that let's stop chasing the score, right? I think we have to think of CSA as a strategic framework, as John outlined. We do need to prepare for potential changes in 2026. Again, the best way for you to kind of stay ahead is stay informed. There's a lot of trucking associations, and just associations in general that people can just subscribe to a newsletter. Like they're advocating for you. We're members of several trucking associations here in the United States. So again, plug in, create some Google alerts, as simple as that. Keywords, have them just flood into your inbox, and then act early. Um, you know, I think John, you mentioned it earlier. The earliest you can do, the best thing you can do is just start acting towards it. Again, it can be overwhelming. That's why we created our free CSA report for any fleet to request, is because this data is in front of you, but our goal is how do we help you kind of understand it, and be able to take intervention. Again, we're not going away for any fleet who reaches out. We'll run your report. Please hit the QR code. But also, if you have any questions around the report, John and his team are here to help you make sense of it, help you understand how, if you're an existing customer, how you can best use one of our products or just process improvement, right? Again, the one thing I want to stress here, obviously we're a technology provider, but a lot of this is just developing a culture around safety and compliance. John, before we take any, I think we may have some room for a question or two, but before we go to Q&A, anything worth adding?
I mean, I know it's not perfect, but I love CSA. I love all the data that's available. I think it's great for fleets to be able to kind of gauge where they're at from a third party looking at their data. You want to be doing a good job with your DQ files, but all of a sudden you get a driver doesn't have his license and you realize, well, we could probably do something to improve that process, make sure that we're giving him the right information at the right time if he needs an electronic copy or whatever it may be. But there's just so much there with the data and the trends are available. Data is king, and I think we need to be utilizing it to be as safe as we can.
Thanks, John. Yeah, maybe we'll open up for at least one or two questions. Yeah, thanks, Blake. If you have anything for us.
Yeah, yes, sir. Great conversation, guys. Really enjoyed it. We do have one question. I know we're up against it on time, but this one question I absolutely want to tee up for you guys. You can rock, paper, scissors, see who gets to take it. But somebody asked, what's the difference between your CSA and ISS scores?
Cool. I'll touch on maybe a little bit, John, and
Yep.
then actually this is actually really relevant because for those who are attending today, keep on stored. We actually do have a upcoming webinar on ISS, where we're actually going to pull our team, former law enforcement, to speak on that. But maybe to better understand SMS basic scores. ISS scores are calculated based on a carrier's basic percentile. Um, so simplest, fewer violations and cleaner inspections improves underlying SMS data, which lowers the ISS score. And the reason why that's important because the ISS score is used by law enforcement to prioritize who they should be bringing in for inspections, right? It's not a coincidence that fleets who have a ton of inspection violations, it kind of feeds on itself. So it is a loop. If this is happening more now, it's going to keep happening unless you like intervene. So that's why we use this language, intervene, because if you don't do anything, you're going to keep getting inspected. It's keep going to feed on itself. And again, I won't spoil too much of the upcoming webinar, but ISS allows enforcement to prioritize who they should be pulling in because let's just be honest, there's millions of trucks on the road. There's not millions of law enforcement inspecting trucks. So it allows them to really prioritize their day. But yeah, I'll stop there. Hopefully that was an adequate answer. If you have any more questions before that next webinar, feel free to reach out to us. We'll make sure we'll get you. Maybe there's someone struggling with a particular percentile and they're getting pulled over a ton. We can dig in further. John, anything I missed from that?
ISS got a little shorter tail on it, so you can have a little quicker impact on it. So that's kind of cool. And just going back to what I've been talking about, trends. So let's not wait till I'm getting inspected every other time I pull into a way station. If I can identify it early before I become part of that loop where you're now I'm getting inspected more often and they're finding a light out, and it can be it's nice to get in front of that, and it reduces your exposure in multiple ways. So it's a good thing to stay in front of that.
Yeah, intervention, maybe that's the word after I talk out loud. I would love to maybe describe this as, you really have to think of this as if you do have really tough CSA scores in a particular bit, you have to intervene because this feeds on itself. And if it's only degrading further, that is going to affect operational items like access to insurance, access to a load board, or a shipper revenue that you've been working on an RFP. They have, and they're going to vet you, and they're going to say, yeah, we're going to prioritize another carrier with better CSA scores, right? That's tactically how this really does affect a carrier out there. So. Well, Blake, thank you for allowing John and I to chat today. I mean, I think if I have to leave everyone, again, actionable QR code, hit the QR code and request a CSA report. This is not the last time you'll see of John. If you reach out, he and his team will be the people you're working with to really understand what's going on with your with your CSA scores, how you can intervene, how Fleetworthy can really support that intervention. John, any last words?
No, I just look at your CSA, get the report, give us a call. We've got a lot of services, but also the report's free, and we'll go through that with you. I'm not a salesman, so I love to look at CSA data and see if we can identify where those violations are coming from.
All right. Thanks, fellas. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to join us. Keep an eye out for the recording of this webinar. We'll send that out this afternoon.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks. Bye.